Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. And I know that Gladiator is a big achievement. It's a big milestone that a lot of players are going to be going after. And in today's video, I wanted to list the specializations and compositions that I would personally play if I was interested in hitting this milestone for the first time. So we're taking this from the perspective of you get some limited experience. Maybe you're not the most talented player, in which classes and specializations are going to, increase the likelihood that you're going to be able to get to that by the end of the season, which is the ideal case, is that you're going to stick to one of these specs the whole season. You're going to play one composition with the same people for the whole season. And if you do that with these compositions and these classes, I think it's going to be the highest likelihood that you can actually achieve that goal in a realistic manner this season. So let's get started here. We get the ranged DPS first, the melee DPS second, and then we will go for the healers from there. For Affliction Warlock, I do think that this is a very good specialization to select, although maybe not the best for completely new players. So I'm going to leave it away from S tier. S tier is like, it's a really good class to go for Gladiator, and it's really easy. This one is a little bit more difficult, but I do think that the compositions and its power level are definitely in a position where it can push you over the edge to go for Gladiator. And I think the recommended composition for an Affliction Warlock is still going to be Rogue, Warlock, Healer, likely a Discipline Priest. Discipline Priest is just looking really good at the moment, but it may be interchangeable with the Paladin or a Mistweaver pending tuning, and those are generally going to be the game plans. Why it's a decent one is just it does insanely high raw throughput. You're going to be able to overwhelm enemies. It was the best composition from season 1, and I think that it's still likely going to be a really good composition, but it is a bit harder to play, especially from the Warlock's perspective. Demonology Warlock, it is getting some giga buffs here on Tuesday, but I really don't think it's going to be spectacular. I think it's likely going to struggle. Main reason is it's a huge amount of ramp, and it's not as agile as Affliction is while it's ramping. So I think because of those reasons, it's going to be very difficult to actually get Gladiator on the specialization. It's a specialization where you're pretty much going to want to play with like a Frost Mage or something like that. It's going to be your best bet. Also, one of Demonology's best comps for the ladder was with an Ellie Shaman, and Ellie Shaman is just not looking very good right now. So, like, one of your best comps just got completely rocked out of the game. And unfortunately, you overlap a lot of DRs with melee, and melee are really good right now, whereas Affliction synergizes with the melee. So playing Demonology, even though it's getting a lot of giga buffs for 3v3 and Gladiator, I think it would be more difficult at this current point in time. Destruction Warlock, I think it's the same deal as Demonology. While it is getting some giga buffs on its Chaos Bolt, it's likely, I mean, maybe it's going to be just disgusting. We have to wait and see. It's the same as Demonology, likely pairing up with Frost Mage, but you can pair up with melee. So you can do the Frost Mage route or the Rogue route. So if you're somebody who maybe is LFGing a lot, pugging a lot, I think Affliction can do all of it, but maybe it's not as good with casters. But I think having some synergy with melee is going to be really important, because it's just these guys are eating good for this season. So you either want to be a range that complements the best melee, and likely avoiding double caster in a lot of cases. Arcane is another specialization that if you're going for Gladiator for the first time, you're probably going to want to avoid this specialization. Although I'm actually going to again, this is supposed to be from the perspective of you don't have a lot of experience. You're coming in, maybe you're not the best player. I think that this requires a much higher level of skill to play than what like an average player is going to be able to produce like in one season going for the first time for Gladiator. Now, if you want to invest in the long term, it can be really good. But for the time being, I'm going to leave it here. Main reason I think it's going here is that Hunters are going to rock your world. Hunters are really good. They are really good. And I think it's going to be rough. Same thing for Fire Mage. I think it is a bit easier than Arcane, so maybe we'll even put Arcane down here. I think Fire is easier than Arcane generally when it's powerful. With the nerfs to Overpowered Barrier, though, I'm a bit worried about your survivability, especially with Hunters now on Tuesday with the changes that are coming through. I think it could be a bit of a rough one. Frost Mage, though, on the other hand, I still think is a really good specialization. I think it's got the ease of Fire without all the complexities of Arcane, and it's still a lot more tanky. It has a lot more control for melee DPS, which makes it really good in the current meta. Maybe the reason I'm not putting it on S is that Hunters, I think, might keep you in check, but it's definitely going to be like the go-to if you want to be going for Gladiator. At the moment, Marksmanship Hunter is definitely S tier. I think it's ridiculously easy to perform on this at the moment, and it does remarkable amounts of damage. Going to be one of the best 3v3 specializations, I think, at the moment, especially if you pair it up with a Ret Paladin. That's going to be like the composition that I'm playing, which is Ret Hunter Healer, Ret Hunter Disc. I think it's going to be really strong. overall. Elemental Shaman, you're probably going to want to avoid, not because it's super complicated and its compositions are hard to play, but it's just the tuning on Ellie is not there at the moment. It's fallen off a lot from the Primordial Wave nerfs, so you would have a really hard time. But if you were going to try and play Elemental, it's going to be the same deal as always, probably like Elemental Shaman Rogue, maybe Elemental Shaman Windwalker. Windwalker is a serious contender. Any of these classes with a Windwalker could likely be disgustingly good, so take that into account. Boomkin, I think, could be decent in this current tuning because the game is so fast that like you can just win in the opener with Incarnation. So like Boomkin Rogue, I think it would be really good right now, and even possibly Boomkin Windwalker or Boomkin Demon Hunter. Where do I want to put this as far as going for Gladiator? I think it's still going to be harder than Affliction or Frost. So I'm gonna put it on B tier. Is it really gonna be that much harder? I'm gonna put it on B tier. I think it's gonna be a bit harder. I think the survivability is a bit harder than these specs, especially for like the average player. But doing damage on it can be even easier than these classes. So maybe really early on, it might be easy to get some rating, but it gets harder as people start focusing on you, knowing how to interrupt you. But Boomkin Rogue, Boomkin Windwalker, I think are going to be kind of the go-tos. Devastation Evoker is really strong right now. I'm putting it up onto S tier. I think you can play Devastation Evoker anything. It's just Devastation plus best class, which could be a Rogue, it could be a Demon Hunter, a Windwalker. You could pair it with almost any melee that's in that top position, much like a Marksmanship Hunter. I think that you are likely going to see success with it. It's just absolutely mowing people down. Beast Mastery Hunter, I don't think is actually that strong. I think Marksman is much better than it at the moment. I'm going to put it down here onto C tier. I think, it's at least in 3v3, and from my personal experience playing the two specializations side by side and playing with people who play it a lot better than me, I think that its sustained damage is just not in the meta at the moment, and it's all sustained damage. Shadow Priest, I think, can be a decent one, although you don't really have the burst damage. So I think the lack of burst damage means that you're going to have to play for longer games, which is generally not like the most intuitive to like the common average player. So I'm going to put it onto B tier for going for Gladiator as far as like a beginner level new player trying to just go for this for the first time. It's probably going to be hard. Augmentation Evoker. It's got a big one shot, and you could honestly pair up with a lot of these melee DPS, and Evoker in general is good in a melee, so there's probably some sleeper Evoker comp that's actually good. Like Aug Windwalker, I could see that being really good. Or even Aug Demon Hunter. I'm actually gonna put this in B tier because I think I've underrated augmentation in way too many tier lists. So I think like you could actually get something going with this, with the amount of damage it has, its durability, its assistance, its counter to melee, and how good melee are at the moment. I think it actually could be good. Arms Warrior after the nerfs. See, this is the hard part because I think the nerfs are actually going to be significant. I would have put it on S tier, but I think it's definitely falling from that point. So a lot of you guys are probably watching this and having played it over the weekend, but like the spec is getting nerfed today. We're talking the actual live season. I'm going to put it here, but I honestly think it could be even lower. Its survivability is much lower than a lot of the other melee in the game, and I think that's something that can be abused, and I think it can get kited pretty heavily by these specs, which I think are likely going to be kind of the trailblazers of the patch. Normally it does really well into the Shadow Priest and the Warlocks, but I feel like a lot of lock specs are going to not really be there this time around. Fury Warrior I think is a lot better. I'm gonna put it on an S tier. I think like Ret Warrior is still going to be a remarkably good composition. I think Fury will I don't know actually, because they brought down the survivability of Fury and Arms I think are a lot more competitive with each other. These two are very difficult. I think that they're definitely near the top. You can make them work, especially with like Ret Paladins paired up with you, but maybe they might be a lot more interchangeable than they've been in the past, so you can play whichever one that you'd like or prefer. Subtlety Rogue, probably not the best if you're playing like for the first time to go for Gladiator. It's just you have to understand how to play the game so much differently than every other specialization. You're obviously going to want to play Rogue, Mage. I think that's going to be the go-to. Rogue Lock possibly as well, or even Rogue Dev. I think any of these burst classes, Rogue Enhance, could even possibly be good. Paired up with any of these burst classes, but I think it'll be harder for you if you're completely new to the game. Outlaw Rogue is the same thing. If this is the first time you're playing the season, although it is really strong, has a lot of control. I think if you're coming in as first time, it's a spec that's going to be really challenging. It's the same thing though. Rogue Mage, Rogue Lock, I think is a lot better though with Outlaw than with Subtlety, but they're likely interchangeable in that regard. Assassination Rogue I think is a lot easier than the other ones. I'm going to put it up here onto B tier. In order to go for Gladiator, I think like Affliction, Assassination is just kind of one of the easier comps. Like if you're going to do some type of rogue build, and you wanted to go for Gladiator for the first time or close to the first time and try and break that plateau, you'd probably want to do it as Assassination. Feral Druid, still really good option, I think. I think Jungle could be really strong right now. The reason I say Ret is I think the immunities and the instant heals, lay on hands and things like that are just strong with how fast the game is. Like it ends within the first round of 20 seconds. So Ret has the most powerful cooldowns in that window. So it's one of the best classes. Feral did get some nerfs. I think it is harder to play than a lot of other classes. So I'm going to kind of put it down here into the middle, mostly due to its own intricacies of itself, its survivability, when to go for clones, when to go into bear. There's a lot of stuff you got to be aware of, whereas a lot of other classes, you're just kind of running in and zugging. And you can use your cooldowns while you're stunned, and they're guaranteed to keep you alive, whereas these cooldowns, some of them you have to use preemptively. I think it's a bit more challenging. Demon Hunter, I think, is going to be a really good spec to go for Gladiator. Do I think it's S or A is really the question. Relative to the other melee, I'm gonna put it onto A tier for now, but I definitely think it could be S tier for 3v3. It's just gonna be Frost Death Knight Demon Hunter. I think is one of the go-tos. Also, Devastation Evoker Demon Hunter seemed really good. You might be really interchangeable, honestly. Like maybe Warlock Demon Hunter could be good, and Boomkin Demon Hunter again. It's just doing a lot of damage. The Eldraki Reaver build is absolutely crit and big. You guys obviously didn't get nerfed at all, so a lot of the specs that are able to crit like 2 million and above that didn't get nerfed for this Tuesday are really good, like day one specs. And as things go on, I can update this tier list as well, because obviously there's going to be changes. If you want to make sure you're staying up to date with those changes, and make sure to smash the subscribe button. Support is greatly appreciated. Enhancement Shaman, I play the Totemic build, which I actually think is a lot better than the Stormbringer build, but oh my god, it has a lot more keybinds. Totemic is way harder to play, but it does way more damage. And Primordial Storm, which is what Primordial Wave turns into, is really cool, and it hits really hard. It's really fun. Does a lot of damage, but it's actually really hard to play. You could do Enhance, because I think Enhance Warrior, Enhance Windwalker, like those are likely going to be really good compositions. So I definitely don't think I can put it below B. But it is a lot harder to play, especially if you're playing Totemic. If you play Stormbringer, it's not that hard. But I think Stormbringer is actually a lot weaker. It's the Totemic build is crazy good on it. I was actually enjoying it a lot when I tried it on my stream. Unholy DK is probably just a hard nope, no matter what. Like, regardless of its skill required or whatever, it's just really underperforming. I think the minor increase to your death coil damage is not enough to put you onto the radar, unfortunately. Unholy is kind of a spec that you may want to just avoid entirely. Frost DK, on the other hand, is really good. This guy, even with the nerfs, you're going to say, oh my god, it just nerfed my Remorseless Winter by like 50%. It's still really good. It is still really good. It's still going to be critting like 2 million upwards of Frost Strikes. And I think like these types of grip comps, grip into Dragon, grip into Warrior, grip into Demon Hunter type of deal, yeah, you're going to be blasting people. Tank spec, I'm just going to drop this guy over here. I don't know how he slept through there. Survival Hunter, I think I slept on a bit. I don't think it's as good as Marksman, but it's definitely pretty close. I'm probably going to put it, though, here in like the mid tier. I think it is harder to play, mostly due to limited mobility. You can get punished really heavily if you don't know where you're going on the map at any given time. And same thing with Survival. I think with a Ret Paladin, Ret Hunter is just one of the best kind of like basic beginner 3v3 comps to get into, to try and get some rating and go for Gladiator or some elite sets in that bracket if you want to avoid the solo queue environment entirely. And then obviously I don't think it would be bad to play with Feral Druid. I think Jungle and Ret Hunter are probably the best top end simple comps that you can play. And you may be able to play some other ones like Windwalker or even maybe at the Death Knight, but those would be kind of more experimental with the given tuning. And a lot of people give me salt for this, but like I'm putting Ret Paladin on S tier. I played it myself yesterday. This thing still hits really hard. I'd like it if they redistributed the damage on some of these specs, out of like Hammer of Light doing like 2 million crits and put that into Templar's Verdict instead. Because yeah, it just seems like you pop that ability and it's just you can instantly kill somebody and they're kind of running around. But with that instant kill paired with the burst damage and a lot of these other top performing specs and the amount of powerful cooldowns that it has access to in a burst meta, like Ret Paladins are typically king. So we're leaving it up here. And Windwalker is also the same case. We're kind of in a melee heavy patch. I think that these guys, I would probably flip the order of these, obviously, in terms of from left to right is like strongest to weakest. Windwalker strongest, Ret second strongest, Frost third, Fury fourth in that regard. And you can probably like couple these guys with almost anything, and it's going to be a really strong composition in 3v3. You could do Windwalker DK, Windwalker Ret, you could do Windwalker, like literally anything, Windwalker Caster, I think, and you'll be good to go. Ret, you would likely want to play with a Mortal Strike class, so like a Warrior, even probably a Demon Hunter or a Hunter are probably going to be your go-tos with that one, but these specs I think are going to be the most desirable for 3v3, especially if you're playing for the first time, but even not, right? Like these guys, if you're the best at the game, might still be the top performers like they were in the last patch. But these guys are way simpler and I think way easier to see results with, especially the compositions that they have. So I would recommend them for like a beginner moderate level. Discipline Priest, probably the best healer to go for. They lost Rapture, but they gained Evangelism. Still seems like they have really good throughput. Just a solid class overall with a lot of cooldowns to rotate through. And I think you can play with the Red Hunters. You can play with some of the caster melee, like Locks and Mages and Rogues. So you have a lot of options in that regard. So still a really good staple healer to go for. Holy Priest has definitely improved a lot. I think it's got significantly more throughput. It's probably going to be a decent pairing with some of these burst classes because you have the range stun. And because it's more about burst damage, you're definitely going to feel a little bit more viable. I don't know why, but I kind of want to put you on B tier still, even despite all of that. I'm going to put you on B tier. I don't even really know why. I don't know why. I think it's just because I don't see you enough to have confidence in putting it much higher than this. And mostly I think it's because you're interchangeable with Disc, and I think Disc is still better. So if you're interchangeable, everybody's going to be like, why aren't you Disc, bro? And it's going to be tough to find teams in that regard. I'm trying to think of like Holy Priest used to be like the wizard healer because you had a stun, so you could play with casters like Afflox that didn't have a stun, and then you'd be the stun for the team. That used to be where you would fit, but I don't know if those comps are going to be necessarily that good. So I think B is probably fair for it. Holy Paladin is a tough one. I think losing the double bop is actually rough given that these classes are now so strong on top of that, right? Like Windwalkers and Warriors are like hard countered by double bop. Now double bop is gone and they're really powerful on top of that. So I think Paladin likely could struggle, and Paladin typically struggles when it's a Demon Hunter patch or a Ret Paladin patch because you just kind of get trained down and die to those classes. So I think Paladin, as far as going for Gladiator, I'm going to put on the B tier. Still is really good overall throughput though, so I think that's definitely holding it up a bit. Mistweaver Monk, I'm jumping this up on the S tier, even with the Crackling Jade nerf. I think it's still a really good pick. I think it's a really good synergy with a lot of these melee classes, like Ret Paladins and Warriors, and you just get these double melee cleaves kind of going on. You just zug your way in and zug your way through the ladder. I think that archetype is going to be really good on this patch. Definitely a strong, viable option. Preservation Evoker, I'm putting on a C tier. I think you have to get too close to the game, and you can get just hard destroyed in a stun by a lot of these classes in like 1 millisecond. So I think Preservation is in 3v3, especially with how much more coordinated it is. I think you're likely going to struggle. Resto Shaman, I think you're also going to struggle. I think like all these comps can just run you over like a freight train. You don't have like really a good way to deal with this level of burst damage. I'm doing this. I'm going to put you on C tier, I think, for 3v3. And then Resto Druid, as it stands right now, I think you're going to struggle. Like Resto Druid typically wants to heal like Shadow Priest, Warlock, and wants to heal like TSG and sit in the far back. I feel like you're going to have a hard time doing that. I'm going to put Resto Druid on the bottom of the list just so we have like more of a spread here. I think it's been really difficult to keep up with the current pacing of burst damage as a Resto Druid, especially with coordinated burst damage that can swap to you. I think that's going to be really difficult. These healers likely are going to really have a hard time. A lot of their cooldowns don't have really high levels of mitigation of damage reduction, if damage reduction at all. I think it's really tough, whereas these guys have kind of the throughput to be able to get through it, or the damage mitigation to be able to get through it at the moment, and they just have the highest throughput. And again, so this tier list is constructed from the perspective that you're kind of new, maybe you're not the best at the game. These are the specs that I think can give you the best performance in 3v3, and if you dedicate yourself to them and the comps that I've listed for those specs throughout the video, that you're going to be able to get to your goal in the long run. And the main thing is to stick to one of these the whole season, stick to one of its compositions the whole season, and try to play with the same people the whole time. And the main reason you do that is you learn when you're most vulnerable in a matchup, so you know when to use cooldowns more instinctively, and you know where you have advantages. So whereas if you're just switching your spec all the time, you never really get completely synced into the spec and what you need to be doing at all times. You're more likely to make mistakes. By playing with the same players, you get more synergy. So that would be my recommendation if you really want to try and go for Gladiator this season so far in week number 1. Hopefully MMR is not going to get hit as hard as it has been in other seasons, so that it's actually kind of like a foreseeable thing within the first month or so. But that's like a wait and see thing. And hopefully if they have done that, listened to us and not made a post, that would have been a huge W for them if they did make a post. It's going to be an epic season. I do expect, there's going to be a lot of nerfs hit. Like we saw pretty significant nerfs just from the preseason. I think a lot of guys flew under the radar, especially like a lot of guys in this top side. So we will have to wait and see that play out. Maybe don't want to drag Fury Warrior down. I don't think so, man. I've seen with the nerfs to it. Just because there's a lot of guys up here, I'm gonna pull this guy down a little bit. Just because there's a lot of guys up there, I'm pulling that one down a little bit. And now if anybody like skipped to some point in the video, now the tier list looks completely different than it did before. But I feel like there's a little crowded up there in S tier. So take a couple guys down there, spread it out a little bit. Tank specs with the nerfs that they got, though, I think are likely going to be a lot less likely to be viable, although they were looking pretty significant. But I'm not going to rank them, though, for the purposes of this video. Yeah, but this is my thought process. Some of these specs that are on the bottom, they're easier specs, but I think with the tuning and the current meta for their spec, that it'll actually be hard, even though they're easy specs to play. So take that into account. And then a lot of these specs on the bottom side are really just difficult to play, and the compositions they have, if you're new to the game, might be really challenging. But if you're an advanced level player, obviously, like Rogue is not going to be down here for going for Gladiator. So just take that into account. This is more so for the perspective that you are new or just a moderate level of skill trying to go for this milestone for one of the first times. So other than that, thank you guys very much for watching the video. Hope you guys enjoyed this breakdown, and I will see you in the next one.